Good morning, everyone, and welcome back from a summer. I hope you've all managed to spend some precious time with family. So today I am delighted to kick off our autumn virtual career schedule, and we have with us today Jacobs and Mace, and today they're going to chat about the role of a project manager. So all I say is sit back, enjoy, and I will hand over to our CEO. Over to you, Angela.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to our virtual career chats with myself, Angela Forbes. It is a great pleasure, as Caroline has said, to welcome you all back from what I hope was a glorious summer, giving us all some much needed time out from emails and virtual meetings. Now, next week, us Civilots will be squeezing ourselves back into our suits for our Insight Day on the 15th at RAF Cosford. And we look forward to meeting you all there in person and hearing from some great speakers and allowing you to have some incredible conversations with the employers and experts in the room. These are fantastic events which bring construction to life, and there will be employers there who were candidates at the last event. So industry is booming, and I'm expecting to see a lot of activity on the day. Now, tomorrow we observe World Suicide Prevention Day. It's where we come together to raise awareness of how we can create a world where fewer people die by suicide. The theme is creating hope through action, to highlight that our actions, no matter how big or small, may provide hope to those who are struggling. Now, the Billforce team recorded a chat with our psychologist Bernie Graham and Roger Morton of Vistry, which we will release today, but we made it for all of us, as it's likely we'll all struggle at points in our life. And it's to know that help is out there and that these feelings can pass. Today, our chat this morning is centred around project management. So this is the fundamental and critical skill set that many of our armed forces personnel possess, but it sits at the heart of our industry. So an incredibly popular career choice and one where many roles do exist. So our speakers today are Richard Jacobs from Jacobs, and from Mace we'll hear from Justin Barter and Chris Gardner. So without further ado, we'll hand over to our first speaker, Richard, and we'll turn our cameras off, Richard.
Thanks very much, Angela. Share my screen. So, Richard Jacobs from Jacobs, no relation, sadly, stakeholder engagement and communication lead. I'm going to take you through a few personal insights and some more detail about the program that I currently work on. I'm a bit odd, really, in many ways, but in this context, I'm odd because I haven't had a military career and then gone into the civilian world. I've actually had a civilian career, gone into the military world, and then come out into project management. And as you can see from this slide, I spent roughly 25 years or so in a variety of different roles around kind of communications, media, marketing, and latterly business development. And I worked for an agency in London. I reached a reasonably senior level, a board level, probably equivalent to a one-star level. And then the company was taken over, and my role was made redundant. So I found myself in my mid-40s without a job. And I was fortunate that for several years up to that point, I'd been a reservist. And when I was made redundant, I turned to my army unit and I asked if I could come down and do work on a more regular basis using reserve service days, RSDs. With the view really that I would do that for a few weeks to keep myself working, to pay some of the bills, and always with a view that I would get back into my civilian role. I worked there for probably the best part of a month before I started to realise that actually it was going to be a lot harder to get back into the civilian world. And my RSDs turned into a deployment onto Opca Brit for around 6 months. And then an FTRS role in my with my brigade. So all told, I was on I was working for my brigade for around 2.5 years before I finally kind of got back into the civilian world. And all of that time, I was applying for different roles to get me back onto Civvy Street. So it would be an exaggeration to say hundreds of applications, but certainly I know for a fact it was over 100 applications were sent to a variety of different jobs in a host of different roles, from the civil service to my previous industries and marketing and communications, and into the project management field as well, which was an area that I had decided I wanted to focus on. I had limited responses. In some cases, I had no response at all. Sometimes the application would be a hit and hope. It would take me half an hour to fill in the form or the web page or whatever it was I was doing. In others, it took me hours. Some of the applications were really, really involved. And to not get any response from having spent so much time applying was really disheartening. I used a number of recruitment consultants, had some good chats, and some are definitely better than others, but at the end of the day, none of them were able to find me a role. And so, having gone from a very senior position and been quite successful in my career to that point, I started to have quite significant feelings of low self-esteem, and I hope that none of you are in the same position. But I have to say, I do know of many people, whether they're leaving the service or whether they've been made redundant in the civilian world, who go through this. And really, the only advice I can give is just to keep going, to be persistent, and most importantly, to use your network. And that's what I did, and that's really where eventually the success came. But Buildforce are a fantastic example of a network that is there for you to use, and you're obviously already doing that. And the program is absolutely fantastic. Use your own network. Reach out to people on LinkedIn. Build up a network of both military contacts and civilian contacts. Don't be afraid to ask somebody to connect. For the most part, they will do. Use the veteran programs. Jacobs has a fantastic veteran program. We are predisposed to welcoming veterans, people who've served in the military, because we recognise the skill sets that we all bring to our new jobs on Civvy Streets. Companies that have signed up to the Armed Forces Covenant are also another great place to start, because again, those businesses are predisposed. They've decided that they're going to support veterans coming out of the military and onto Civvy Street, and the Armed Forces Covenant website lists all of the businesses that are signed up to that. And as I said before, it's persistence that really does pay off. In the end, the role that I secured at Jacobs was through somebody that I'd met at my army unit, another reservist, and it was through that networking and being willing and able to talk about myself, swallowing a bit of that pride, really, and just being prepared to say, look, this is who I am, this is what I'm after, and this is what I'd like to do, and asking people to help is a really important lesson that I learned, and that I would advise others to follow. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the program that I work on. It's known as the F-35 Bed Down Works. We are based at RAF Lakenheath. That's where the program is. RAF Lakenheath is a US base on the Suffolk and Cambridgeshire borders. It is home to the US Air Force 48th Fighter Wing, and our role is to project manage the building, the construction of a variety of different assets to support the arrival of 2 new squadrons of F-35 aircraft to the UK towards the end of this year. Those assets include hangars, an operations building, a mission simulator, various maintenance facilities, 2 aircraft aprons or car parks for aircraft, and a host of other training and maintenance facilities on the site. I think what's really interesting for me, having come from the marketing industry into the military and now into a completely different industry, was just the variety of different roles that exist under the banner of project management. I didn't know about this until I'd entered the world, and it continues to be interesting and provide lots of opportunities. So of course there is sub-program and project management, but underneath all of that, there are a variety of different roles, and each of those bullet points really represents a different role or position that you could take. You'll see mine listed there as stakeholder management and communications. There is quantity surveying, which would include your cost monitoring. There's risk, there's schedule management, planning, site supervision, and health and safety there listed under SHU, and that's what I think is really exciting about this. I currently hold one of those positions. It's the role that I'm engaged with, but if I wanted to, I could potentially retrain. If I was particularly interested in risk management, my company would give me the opportunity to retrain and move into a different area, which I think is really exciting. It means that I can move that particular skill set onto a different program. I currently work in defence. There would be the opportunity potentially for me to work within nuclear, renewable energies, within rail transport. So the opportunity really, once you've got your experience and you're into this world, the opportunities are could be limitless, depending on what you particularly want to do and what appeals to you. So I think I'm there on time now. I'm going to hand back and take any questions towards the end. Thank you.
Richard, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. And if we could please pass over to Mace, to Justin and Chris.
So myself and Chris are going to take you through for the next 10-20 minutes. Really, this first slide is just to give you a little bit of background on the both of us. We're not here to talk about our military experience per se, but at the same time, it hopefully will allow you to orientate to the level of experience we'd had. Hopefully that will align with some of you as individuals, so that you can maybe take more bits from one or other of us, depending on what we've done previously and how we've found that beneficial. So I'll kick off. I spent 14 years in the Army in the Royal Engineers, so a very generic Royal Engineers background in terms of troop commanding, but not really specialising in any particular area. I'm not an engineer. I do not have an engineering background, so very much a management background. Since leaving, I actually didn't come straight into the built environment or PM consultancy. I actually went and worked for a winery. So Nightimber make English sparkling wine, and spent a little bit of time there. And Chris will also show that he's had a similar experience before. We then both ended up in Mace, but I think we'll probably speak about that a little bit more when we get onto our individual slides. In terms of that period of time in the Army, I did Optelic 9, Opheric 10, Staff College, and then I departed after my initial grade 2 staff appointment, which was at Abbey Wood. Whilst not wanting to go to Abbey Wood, actually set me up really well for transition and landing within my civilian career. But again, more on that later. Chris, if I can hand across to you.
Yeah, hi. So Chris Gardner. I spent 5 years in the Army as a infantry officer. One of the things that is worth highlighting is you don't need to be an engineer to be in construction. When I left the military, I completely discounted going into construction or any of that because of a non-engineering background. And I will say that when I had interviews moving into construction, there was a bit of a challenge to overcome, to map across my experience of management, leadership, those experiences there, trying to convince interviewers that my experience digging trenches was equitable to building a multi-million-pound building. So I had a very standard rifle platoon, machine gun platoon commander. I went to Catterick, as a platoon commander instructor. Had a stint as the engagements officer for the infantry battle school. And one thing that's probably worth highlighting is that whilst that's a less desirable job, it's, you know, it was a trawl, go fill this job for a couple of months. Actually, when I was looking at interviews and doing interviews with civilian companies, the work I did there was actually one of the more equitable experience they could understand, and that they actually valued it quite a lot more than my necessarily war stories of running around, you know, wrecking beacons and stuff like that. Had a OPTOR experience as well. When I left the army, I went on to BP's trading house as a operations officer. One of the things I would highlight there is that operations in the civilian sector doesn't mean the same as what we think it was in the military. You know, I had a good time there. I learned a lot, but fundamentally the job was not what I wanted to do, not what I thought it was going to be. So looked to reorientate out of there and came across to Mace. I think I'm the definition of a network success, because I got into Mace via, you know, talking to people who then put me in front of people who then put me in front of people, and understanding the job roles there, and that's how I came into the company. And then came in as a assistant project manager, which whilst it's quite a relatively junior grade, you know, comparable to sort of whilst doing the military and what I was doing at BP, it has given me the absolute room to grow. Learning an awful lot in my year at Mace, and it just prevents me from being overexposed, learning a lot, but then also being able to take on a lot of responsibilities when I need them. Slide, please.
It's not moving through. 1 second.
Cool. So I think one of the first things that's worth talking about is what is a project manager. It's the most generic title that's going since the, you know, army officer. If you're an army officer, what are you? Are you a doctor? Are you a lawyer? Are you a para? Are you an engineer? You know, nobody knows what they are, and it can lead to a lot of different things. Same with project manager. You could be effectively small fish, big pond, where you are doing just change management. You're just dealing with the RFIs. You're just dealing with contract administrations, or you might be just dealing with the stakeholders, or you might just be doing the bids. You know, all of that across consultancy is still project managers. Or you can go into the world where I am, which is you are big fish, little pond, where you're running £8 million size projects and you're doing everything yourself. You are, you know, engaging with all the stakeholders. You're engaging with the design team. You're engaging with the contractor who's delivering the project. You're, you know, you're doing absolutely everything. So that's, I think, is an important thing to understand, the difference of what those roles are. So when you are applying them yourself, you know what you're looking at and what you're looking to take away. Build. Some assumptions from the military. You know, we all are God's gift to the world, especially in the infantry. But can a CEO be your OZ? This is what we have to understand, and it comes down to the language you use. You know, everybody knows that you talk about, you know, your Charlie fire team, your Delta fire team, you know, 3 section is not section 3, and that's one of those nuances where you have to use the language that they understand. Don't just assume because you've got all this huge, amazing leadership management experience, you know, you've led people on tours or anything like that, that necessarily translates across to being able to manage another firm of consultants. And so you have to, that's one of the challenges I found, is trying to use the language that they understand. You know, when we prepped for PO visits, that sort of thing, you'd read regimental journals. It's the same thing for this. Read industry journals, read those sort of things, so you can understand when people talk about CAIs, when people talk about NEC versus JCT contracts, traditional versus D&B. These are things that you need to be able to say and talk about in exactly the same way that you can easily talk about a, you know, sequential platoon attack. Slide. So my role, I'll go through a quick overview of it, and then we'll go on to effectively a week in the nice standard week, and I think that's kind of a good way of picking it out. So my role's got a good blend between site and office. I'm probably on site maybe once, twice a week, and then the rest of the time is in the office, or as I am at the moment, at home. One thing I really like, and I think the military can really bring, is I found the relationships is very similar to your officer, senior NCO, warrant officer relationship. You know, that's between the consultant and the contractor who's delivering it. They're usually, you know, the contractor project manager on the construction side is usually a little bit more, long in the tooth, a little bit more grizzled, understands it. They will know things that you will never know in your short time. But it's then being able to have that balancing act between as a consultant, you're still running, you're still accountable for what's going on, but you need to draw on their expertise. So the role itself is quite a link role, so you don't necessarily do much day to day, but you're tracking what everybody else is doing. You're bringing in the design team, you're bringing in the contractor, you're firefighting these problems, and then you're presenting these problems. We're trying to come up with solutions, or at least know who has to have these solutions. You're there to represent the client. So when the contractor's trying to, come up with a solution that maybe, is easier or cheaper for them, or the design team don't necessarily want to do what they want to, go to the level of effort they want to do, you are there to hold those people to account. And a bit of quality assurance, when we put tender packs together, it's looking through the tenders going, is this what we expect to do? Have you put it together right? Is there any faults? Is there any problems? And balancing different priorities, you'll have, like, I've got 3 projects at the moment, and each of those have got different priorities, and each of those projects themselves are different priorities. So it's how do you balance all those conflicting priorities, which everything is the most important thing in the world to somebody else. How do you make your priority somebody else's priority, and how do you balance what's important to you? And one thing I looked at getting was the APM PMQ. There's lots of project management qualifications out there, Prince 2, Agile, all those things. I went down the APM PMQ route. It's basically the 7 questions remastered effectively. Whilst it wasn't required for the job, I found that when I had interviews with people, it was just a tick in the box. It's like when you apply, when graduates apply for jobs, have you got a degree? Yes, cool, good. You can show that level of understanding, you can show that level of experience. And it's a way of like being able to pay yourself at a certain level, and shows you've committed to it. So I recommend APM at the moment is kind of a good one for the industry, but that's just my personal experience. Next one. Okay, so this is just a standard week I've picked, and I'm just going to highlight a few pertinent points. So as I said, I've got 2 main projects I'm working on. One is a single £8 million refurbishment of a building, and the other one is about £3 million program works across 15 sites. And then those are my 2 ones, and then I'm supporting another one, which is a demolition, and then on top of that, I'm looking to put together a bid for another project that we're hoping to win. That, in terms of, is the scale of the program, and that's what I'm going to be doing each week. And you can just see, if you look in my diary, on Tuesday I had to go to site. We had a meeting on site talking about a lot of the design issues, trying to get the contractor and the designer to bring together the solutions. It was a traditional contract, which meant that there's a lot more emphasis on the designer, and it's trying to hold the design team to account to be able to do that level of design, rather than them shifting the risk and responsibility onto the contractor. Then we had a program project catch up with all the stakeholders involved, the client, all their accountant team, just to bring everybody up to date. And then so that was all done on site for the morning. Afternoon, went back to the office, caught up on some of the other problems, some of the other emails, and then had a meeting in the afternoon to go through all the RFIs, exactly the same as they are in the military, it's actual real term. Who knew? And basically go through all the requests for information, then filtering those out to where they were going, who's meant to answer them, and then actually getting people to answer those questions, because again, it's not their priority, it's your job to chase that. And when the answer is not the actual real answer, you need to go back and be like, this hasn't actually answered the question. So that's the level of, you need to have some technical understanding, but you're not the technical expert. And then the next day, Wednesday afternoon, I was out at a couple of different sites on my other project. Went to a site visit at one location, dealt with all the problems on the site there, and then basically went and found a cafe for a couple of hours and did some sort of laptop work there before I then went on to another site. And that's the level of autonomy that you've got, which is you manage your time, you know where you need to be, you prioritize. That afternoon, I needed to be out on site to be able to give the constructors the answers they needed, or to be able to pull those people in. And then also find the time to be able to actually catch up on the emails that we're going through. Problems like suddenly somebody doesn't have the authority to be able to dig some part of the road up. How do we solve that? Who do we need to talk to? I then need to try and find out those authorities, find out those regulatory bodies, that sort of thing. And then the next 2 days was all office-based, big gateway reviews on Friday. You know, have we got everything we need to do? Have we achieved these targets? Have we brought everything on board? Yeah, and that's like a go no go situation. Slide. So this is a week I'm doing at the moment, and I think what's interesting is talking about is that I got very lucky early on. I went and did a 6-week site-based role, again project manager, but I was doing more of like the logistics role and the packet manager jobs. I know NCOs are rolling their eyes at a infantry officer, direct entry officer doing logistics, but again, it's very different in the civilian world from what we understand. And that was a site-based every single day, out in Paris, paid for accommodation and stuff like that. So there is a good level of variety there. Obviously, got to hand over to Justin now, but I'll be happy to take any questions at the end. Justin.
Super, thanks very much, Chris. So I guess all I want to do really here is there's a lot going on this slide, and really for me, I want to build on what Chris has said, and I guess really there in terms of the grades of PM that we have, actually it's all very similar work. It's just you'll get more projects or larger projects or take more responsibility, and also your level of understanding and technical understanding should also improve as you progress through the organisation. This slide really has got kind of my brainstorm of all the things that I've found quite useful, kind of my journey from on the left hand side, trying to package up and understand what the skills were, moving through transition and then to where I am. We haven't got a huge amount of time to go through all of these points, but hopefully it'll generate some thought, and maybe we can pick it up in the Q&A session. But the key points really I'd like to drag out. That top left box really is a really good snapshot of the types of skills that you all have. So anyone who has worked, been trained within the military, kind of can bring that to the party. That's actually from a Deloitte paper where they reviewed a number of different veterans, did a large study, and actually these are the skills that people kind of fall into. So that's great, and I think it's really important that you understand how valuable those skills are and how they are not necessarily common in the civilian workplace. Don't get me wrong, there's some amazing leaders out there that have much better skills than some of us have, but at the same time, the experiences that you've all had and the way you've been trained, the way you've worked, absolutely is valuable and highly transferable, particularly in what some people refer to as that soft skills area. At the same time, you also need to realize you're going to have weaknesses. Even if you go into defense, you'll still be learning a new skill set in terms of PM consultancy. So there are still bits that you're going to need to understand. And I guess it's just making sure you've got that time and space to reflect, to understand what you need to do and where your weaknesses are, and depending on which industry you go into. And that's not always necessary, but for me, that professional development and continuous improvement is what keeps you sharp, is what keeps you engaged, what keeps you motivated. So understanding where your weaknesses are is not a showstopper. It's just understanding how you bridge that gap through mentoring, through reading, through professional development, through courses, all of that good stuff. That central box, again, not really time to go into the detail, but I think really the only point to pull through there is the bit I said at the start that really tied into what Richard said as well, and it's the power of networking. And Caroline's absolutely fantastic for that. If there's an organisation that you can't get to because your network doesn't go that way, please do use Caroline, because she knows everyone and can get you to chat to whoever you need to chat to. It's really nice to see a few people on this call actually that I've spoken to in the past as well. So I really think that Build Force network works. And also what you don't realise until you decide you're going to leave, there's a ready-made military network, which is just fantastic. And I was so humbled that when I was leaving, anyone who I asked for a coffee, a chat, just to get a bit of advice, every single time people made time. And don't be scared of making a direct approach on LinkedIn. Most people will make time for you if they physically can. So network, basically, that's how you'll find a role, and it's also how you find out what an organization's really like and what the people are really like on the inside. I guess that really takes me across to that last box there, and I wanted to just spend a little bit of time on the lessons that I've learned. So as Chris and I said at the start, we both actually went to different sectors and different jobs before we ended up in Mace and in the built environment. for me, I got a really interesting role that I wanted to go and do, but the culture in the organisation I landed in wasn't suitable, wasn't what I wanted, and I therefore made a call really early on to come across to Mace, which has so far been a really good call because of the culture in the organisation. So for me, don't necessarily rule stuff out, but also understand the importance of a culture of an organization. Do as much research as you can, again back to networking, so you can chat to those people and really understand the type of organization it is. Some of those organizations that will work you exceptionally hard, potentially in financial services, may well remunerate you well, and if that's what motivates you, great. But if actually you want to see tangible outputs, see where your work goes, to be with individuals whose values align. For me, those are really important things, and I've certainly found a number of organisations, particularly Mace, their values have aligned with basically what you've been brought up with within the armed forces, but then also personally what I found important. I think the other lesson that I wanted to really hit on is professional development. So whilst we've got that great package of soft skills, you then need to bridge the gap, and I think for me the most useful bit there is chartership. So it's understanding the different avenues that you can use to make yourself more credible, to make sure you add value, but also really to translate previous experience to make sure it's packaged up in a way that people understand. So within our industry, either RICS, CIOB or APM are all really good bodies, depending on where your background is from and where you want to take your career. Really good opportunities for chartership that give you that wraparound mentor support and really good resources to make sure you remain competent and current and are able to upskill into your specific area. I'm personally starting this month a construction and real estate based MBA, which the business is funding. So again, having done a bit of orientation to what I wanted to do, most good organizations will support you through that. So again, having a bit of a plan, even at whichever stage of the transition you're at, is really useful. And then finally, just noting we're pushing up on time, just to touch on my role really. I joined Mace and went into the defence business unit. As I was leaving, I didn't want to stay in defence. I wanted to get as far away from defence as possible to get a bit of experience. But it just so happened that the role that came up that worked for me was in the defence business unit, actually in DIO, in a type of role that I spent my whole army career trying to avoid, but actually really enjoyed it. I did 13 months in there, basically into the requirements manager. So my last job at DE&S was a requirements manager, and then my first job in civilian world was a requirements manager. And whilst I wanted to get away from defence, this actually had a lot of really good positive impacts, positive spin-offs from it. I could add value straight away. I already had a network there. I knew what I was doing, and when you leave, you can end up going to a new industry, having to learn that industry, and moving into a new type of role and having to learn that role. So the benefit for me was having moved into defence, and particularly requirements management. I knew the industry and role. It gave me a lot of space then and a soft landing to understand what being a project manager was, and how I needed to do that, and maybe dig into some of the more technical details in terms of contract administration, construction life cycles, bits where I wasn't as up to speed as I should be for someone who would have spent 10, 15 years in that industry already. So don't necessarily move away from defence. I found it really beneficial, but what I have done more recently is broken away from defence because I personally wanted to increase that base of the pyramid and get as wide a range of experience as possible. So I've recently moved across to the public sector in Mace, and initially started cross-sector within that, so working from the Ministry of Justice and working for Hampshire County Council. Ministry of Justice was a really good role that it helped me improve my project management skills. So I took on new things I hadn't done before as a contract administrator, as a client representative, being much more responsible for an end-to-end project. Again, relatively small scale, so a couple of £8 million refurbishments of court buildings, so Winchester Crown Court and Southampton Crown Court. And then more recently, I've actually moved into a programme management role, and I'm now full-time with Hampshire County Council, and we are managing a £30 million decarbonisation programme. Not technically difficult, but really interesting in terms of having to deliver significant change at pace to an organisation whose processes are clunky, to say the least. And I guess really what's the point to drag out there? Actually, I'd say it's the skill set that I've learned from my military experience that is beneficial there, not the experience I've picked up since being within Mace. So it's the ability to engage stakeholders, to understand someone else's process, to help drag a number of individual projects through, and then bring that all together at program level, and really try and bring some level of order to chaos, really. So something that I think potentially a lot of people in this call would be really comfortable at doing. And again, that's leaning back on those soft skills. I'm going to stop there and hand back to Angela and Caroline, because I think it'd be good just to leave some time for Q&A. I did have one final slide, which basically goes through the Mace hiring process, but I'm very happy to pick that up individually or maybe in the Q&A session. But it just basically highlights some of the process if people wanted to further the conversation and come have a chat about potential roles in Mace. But I'll leave that for now. Thank you ever so much.
Justin, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. If I could ask our speakers to put their cameras back on, please. If you do have a question, then either type it in the box, or you're more than welcome to raise your hand and ask away. Okay, I'll kick off with a few. So listen, your presentations were excellent, very, very insightful, all three of you. So thank you very much for that. I'll kick off with Richard. A couple of things, Richard. Chris mentioned the benefits of Prince2 and APM, PMQ and Agile. Is it needed for Jacobs, do you know?
So it's a great question, and actually our head of profession at Jacobs, Louise Dowley, for project management, she said the other day in another talk that she was giving that the most important thing for us is experience. So we don't require APM or Prince2 as a sort of starting point. If, however, as Chris and Justin mentioned, if you've got it before you leave, great. It is absolutely another tick in the box. It shows intent. It shows that you're you're taking that direction seriously, but it's not necessarily a requirement. And as I think we've all, well, I didn't say, but Chris and Justin said, that what you learn on the job is the most important thing, and you'll be learning stuff that you couldn't possibly have predicted, and you certainly aren't going to learn by doing either one of those two qualifications.
Okay, now another question we often get asked, Richard, is obviously you've got this stakeholder management and communications role. Did you have an initial role when you joined Jacobs? Was there a stepping stone to lead you to your current role, or did you step straight into it and grow from there?
So because of my background in marketing and communications, I stepped straight into that role, and I didn't step into the job that I'm in currently. I did another similar role, but working for the program management office before going directly onto the operation. But it was my skill set beforehand that got me into that particular role. One thing I didn't say though is we've talked, or I certainly talked about the roles within the program that I currently work on. One day a week out of my 5 days, I spend on something called the Space Campaigns, Jacobs Space Campaign. So that's more of a business development role, and we're looking at how we can develop our business based on our experience in the US with NASA, how we can drive our space business in the UK, which is, I might not have made it sound that interesting. It's really, really interesting. And I've got that by reaching out into the rest of the business. So I don't know if Chris and Justin, you might have experienced this, but when you're on the operational side, when you're on a program or a project, you can get quite isolated, particularly if you're embedded like Justin. You can get quite isolated from your parent company, and what it's really also very important to do is to reach back into the parent company from time to time in order to help you move on. And so the point that I think we've all made about networking is just as important when you join a business like Mace or Jacobs or Mott MacDonald, Leidos. You have to be networking within your business as well as before you join, because that's what helps you move on and take those other interesting challenges that I think we've all talked about.
It's a really good point you raised there. You mentioned business development. So obviously we all have our day job, but there are other expectations of us. Do you all touch on business development? Is it an extension of your role? Are you all trying to uber impress the client that you're working for, so repeat work comes from it? What does that look like for you all?
I'll answer quickly and then hand over and stop my monologue. But yes, definitely. So there are two ways two ways that I've certainly done it. So on the program, and as somebody that's operational at the moment, we're asked for our proofs. Basically, they are case studies, for want of a better word, of the work that we're doing. So those case studies of the work that we're doing, in my case at RAF Lakenheath, will go into new business pitches for other similar projects and programs, either with the same client, in our case the DIO. The other way that we might get involved is if we, and I talked about this just a minute ago, about looking at different departments. It's perfectly feasible for somebody who is interested in moving into the sales and business development world to do that, to move across. There's nothing, to my mind, certainly in our business, there's nothing stopping individuals from doing that. And anecdotally, some of our senior team have said, actually, you probably ought to spend, in order to move through the business, you probably ought to spend a bit of time understanding how we actually develop our business. And that was inside sales or outside sales, for example, or working within that new business function. Stop there.
And Justin, for you at Mace?
Yeah, so I think I'd agree with everything said there. I think for me personally, there is an expectation that you develop your relationships and you bring in new work. But for me, this has been most simply done by turning up and doing a good job, really. Once the client gets a feel for you as an individual or you as a team and what you can bring, that if you do a good job, that naturally leads to more work. I've actually found the problems the reverse is when you've gone in to deliver what you initially set out to do. And actually, personally, I've found other opportunities that I want to move across to, but the client wants to keep hold of you. And actually, that's probably the biggest challenge of managing that relationship, because absolutely you want to do that, but you then need to make sure it fits with your own personal plan as well. So yeah, I think that's really the experience I've had. I suspect people that go into defence business units have got a better ability to do business development, particularly some of maybe the more senior people on this call, through their networks. So I guess it's also just understanding how to leverage that, and also actually some of the ideas that you have as individuals can genuinely help the client. And I think that's the trick, is if you genuinely understand what their problem is and you can genuinely offer something, business development's easy. So yeah, I think that's it really from me.
Okay, fantastic. A couple of questions are coming in from John Wilkinson. So he'd like to work in renewable energy. Could he opt for this from the outset as a PM? So does PM give you the kind of bedrock and foundation of a career, and then you can move into subsectors from there, do you think? Or would you advise he head straight for renewable energy?
I can jump on. No, go on, Chris. You go.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, so I think when you say you want to work in the renewable energy side of it, there's different ways of how it's going to come about. Whether you just want them as a client, or whether you want to be completely embedded in that. Because, for example, of my 3 projects, one of them is around renewable energies and not necessarily renewable, but like decarbonisation. Another client is a public body, and another one's a university. So I think it's how you can go into that. It's whether the job that you apply for has that as a client. I think it's one way of looking at it from the consultancy side of it, especially.
I mean, that's a really good point, Chris. I think there's lots of ways that you can kind of skin a cat almost. You can sit as a PM and touch it. You can sit firmly in there. You can sit on the client side. You can sit as a PM on the contractor side. And I think that's what's fantastic about the industry, isn't it? John, I hope that's answered the question. If not, you're more than welcome to come on and ask a sub-question. Neil, thank you for the presentations. Can the Mace folks comment on the training process if you are onboarded? So what does that look like? It might even touch slightly on your slide, Justin.
It's like a staged question from Neil. So Neil, it's nice to see you. I hope we're not keeping you up too late. He's in New Zealand at the moment. So yeah, no, absolutely. Chris and I have been trying to develop a Mace military program. So we've had a lot of individuals that have joined the company and have done really well, but there was no formalized program that brought that all together and almost gave you that arm around the shoulder. So what we're trying to do, and the business is supporting, and we're very soon to roll out, is basically the first year that you're in the business, 16 days will be allocated for training, where different parts of the Mace Military Network or different people within the business will provide presentations on the key areas that we feel are areas that most service leaders need to develop, and also just doing a lot of the stuff that we've learned through trial and error, standardizing it, formalizing it so that we can accelerate people's development. So I think in terms of your question, Neil, yeah, that first year, very formal level of support where we'll offer formalized training. But for example, last night, Chris and I, for the first time, managed to get into London to meet the rest of the Mace Military Network, which is the first time in a long time. And again, that's just that's a more informal side to it. So Chris, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, just pick up on the point of when do the stabilizers come off? When you're ready. So I started off very much as like the assistant project manager. You know, my project manager on one of the main ones we got, he'd hand me things every now and again, like, Chris, you're now in charge of dealing with all the RFIs, you know, and coordinating that. And what's happened is quite quickly we've slipstreamed. So he's taken on bigger, more projects, and I've now mostly ended up running this project completely by myself. And I just check in with him every now and again when I don't know the answer, it's beyond my level, or it's literally a case of I can't unpick this anymore. I now need to bring in the big guns to fix it. So when you're ready is I'd say how it works.
Okay, and I think we see that recurring actually. We see a lot of candidates even getting into senior roles and asking just that last minute blip in nerves in terms of what's expected of me on day one. So, and I think that's true of every organisation. The team are there to support you. They need you to do well, so they will make sure that they're with you along the way. And as you're right, the stabilisers come off as you're good to go, as you're ready. Another question, slightly contentious question from Alex. Salary. How do you approach the salary question when you do have limited experience? So I'll kick this off initially if everybody wants to join me. So if a role is advertised, it has a salary band, and that salary band will be between 30 and 35. So 30 if you've got limited experience, and you'll be up at 35 if you've got more experience. So there tends to be transparency from employers when you're applying for a role itself. If you're just having a chat, so if an employer says, "Oh, come in and we'll talk about it," and you've got no idea what the role is or what the salary expectations are, typically at Builds Force, what we'll advise you to do is just confirm your current salary. So, and it's a 3-second response. I'm currently on 40,000, but I'm happy to review it. And then what you're doing is you're just putting a kind of marker in the sand. It's such an awkward, icky question. People can start waffling their way for 2 minutes through an answer and then offer up a discount at the end just because they think that's what they have to say. So just sometimes a kind of short, sharp bullet is the way to go. I mean, Richard, without disclosing too much, how did you deal with that question?
I asked directly during the process of onboarding, which I have to say took the best part of 6 months. I just asked directly what the salary banding was, and that's it. And I think that I'm not sure if I made the point strongly enough earlier, but it's quite humbling initially to to have to do all of that stuff, to put yourself forward in that way, to talk about money in that way, because it's so in the military, your salary is there for everyone to see. It's put on notice boards. Everyone knows. You might not know what you specifically earn at that point in your career, but they'll know roughly what you earn if you're at a certain rank. That doesn't happen in the civilian world, and it's a source of great frustration because you'll find people doing the same job who are paid significantly differently. Not so much in our company, I have to say, but across the business, across the civilian world, that's true. So yeah, you just have to be upfront and ask. But I think your point about don't waffle, just get to it, be honest, but also understand, well, what is it you want? What salary do you need? And I had to, and on the limited times that I did get an offer of an interview, and in one case a job, I just had to turn it down because I couldn't afford to do that job at that salary.
And Chris, how did you respond to that question? Was there transparency at the start with Mace, or did you have to probe?
Yeah, so I think I negotiated quite well for my salary. So it's like you said, there's bands, and I think, you know, because of the way I came into the business, it was much more of a networked way in. So I was having a informal conversation with someone who happened to be a hiring manager, which then turned into an interview during our conversation. And at that point, you know, I literally put my salary expectations out there, of what I was expecting based on what I was on in the military and what I was earning at VP. I think it's worth highlighting the fact that different sectors, Justin picked up on it earlier, different sectors have different pay capabilities. I went from, you know, one of the biggest oil companies in the world to construction, where frankly the pays, you know, they're not comparable, but then I absolutely enjoy my job a lot more than I did at BP. So that's the way I factored that. But yeah, I just put out what I was expecting to pay, what I was expecting to get, and that set the tone of the conversation really. So I led it by saying what I was hoping to get really.
And just on that, I mean, Alex did mention about having limited experience. Did you ever feel as if you were in the back foot, or you didn't have much to offer Mace, or did you have confidence in your transferable skills and what you had done in the military?
I think coming from an infantry background, and I was applying for jobs in COVID, and not getting places. You know, I had quite a few rejections, and it is disheartening. So there was an element of a lack of confidence, and lack of experience and stuff. But I think what happened was quite quickly, when I started working, I looked left and right at what other people were doing, what other people's grades were, and what they were producing. And I would tell anybody in the school, you know, you could be infantry and have only dug trenches. Like, your soft skills of management, leadership, client relationships, that's what we bring to the party, and your ability to cut through the problem and know who needs to be able to deal with it. That puts you in really good stead. So I would say I did lack confidence. It did tailor how I approach things, but then that also meant I was just a lot more humble and asked a lot more questions, which is not a bad place to be in.
Okay, no, very, very good point there. And just a further question from Daniel for you. You mentioned doing research into the job sector so that you can speak their language. How did you start, and what resources would you recommend? And that's to all of you. Chris, do you want to start off?
Yeah.
Personally, I think.
Sorry,
is it Chris?
No, Justin.
I'll
You're
take it,
eager to go.
No.
We'll listen.
No, that's cool. So I think the events that are run from Buildforce are a great starting point to be able to start networking and talking across the industry. So those are absolutely useful. Building.co.uk I find really useful to subscribe to. They offer a weekly roundup, which is really useful just to stay up to date with what's happening in the industry, just for a bit of wider reading. And I think then really just your own personal research. So if there's a particular area, so where that question came up about renewable energy, just doing the background reading you need to. Sustainability is what you're interested in, do the background reading on that. It is really difficult when you're trying to work out how to use your learning credits before you actually find a role. It's really difficult. So I think you need to try and keep that base quite wide. So you do those generic qualifications, or just stuff that interests you. And then actually once you land a job and get into the industry, that's where you need to probably do that really detailed scrub of actually where your weaknesses are and where you need to focus your attention. And there'll be mentors around you that are able to probably direct you to the most relevant courses. But I'd say just read as widely as you can and attend Caroline's events.
Yeah, I'd echo that. And just companies have their own journals, and same with regimental journals. Read those. Construction newsletters. I'll tell everybody now, traditional versus D&B, look at those. NEC versus JCT contracts. That I think is the foundational building blocks I've come across. And if you start researching down those, then that will probably pull you into a lot more aware of the bits you need to start picking up on.
Okay.
I just add one thing to that as well. Is I remember before, whilst I was going through various onboarding interviews for Jacobs, so before they'd actually made me a job offer, the language that they were using, some of the acronyms, it didn't mean anything to me. So the APM actually offer a free online course. It's like an introduction to project management, which is, and I think, and I'm sure, I don't know if Prince did as well, but there are various free courses like that where it's just about getting the lexicon as it is in the military or any other organization. So you just, when somebody's throwing in these words or these acronyms, you just have an understanding of what it is what they're talking about.
Okay, fantastic. And talking about acronyms, Jordan's trying to test us this morning. Do you think rank holds any weight behind your employment success? I mean, I'm leaving as a corporal and feel like companies would see me as inexperienced. Am I naive to aim for a PM role? Caroline is biting at the bit to get to that question.
I am afraid, and I have just furiously tried to type away there as well. So I can put hand on heart and say that recently I placed a corporal as a PM with Mace, and that was great. And in actual fact, I have had requests for it not to be officer heavy at the PM level, which is a danger we can all slip into. I also had a conversation with Jacobs yesterday and their head of military talent, and they're specifically looking for the more junior ranks. So, you know, it isn't just officer level. You may go in as an assistant PM rather than straight in as a PM, or you may go in as a PM, but absolutely there are opportunities for you. Just need to find the right organisation and, you know, the right timing for them wanting PMs at your level.
Okay, fantastic. Your comment, Stuart, is noted. That's for Justin and the team. Josh Small, thank you for the presentations. I've taken a lot from today. I am currently working as a project manager in the civilian sector as a specialist contractor, as described by Chris. I am looking to move to consultancy. I've done a lot of research into both your companies. How do I tailor my experience towards the more generic field of main contractor? And a lot of roles seem to require main contractor and degree backgrounds. Okay, so this is somebody that's kind of jumping ship from delivery side into consultancy. Surely they're seen as little gold mines, somebody coming with all that experience. Do you agree? And have you got any colleagues over at Mace, Chris or Justin, that's done that? And you can see the value that they add to the team?
Yeah, so I don't actually have any specific examples, but I'd agree absolutely a goldmine in terms of that level of credibility, and it's just that mix of a team. So where you wouldn't necessarily want a team full of ex-military, it's having different people with different backgrounds and having someone in the office with you from a consultancy perspective that knows how contractors think and work, and or from the construction side, absolutely invaluable. So no, I think there's a lot of space for it. Again, it's no different from anyone that's landing consultancy, understanding that there's going to be a gap in your skills and having to bridge that, but the value that could be added, I personally think, yeah, it's a no-brainer.
The point I'd make on that, Josh, is if you are applying for roles and you're not having any success because you don't have any experience in the consultancy PM role, I get that. So sometimes it's computer says no. So it's maybe looking for a mentor or a champion. Caroline can help you by getting your CV in through the kind of back door instead, and seeing if somebody is able to kind of champion you or support you in that transition. So we can certainly help with that. If there are any other points or questions, there's lots of people kind of typing away. The questions are certainly coming in, so thank you for that. I think probably the one question that I would ask, I'll start with Justin, is your perception of what the PM role would have been versus the reality. Is it more or less administrative? Is it more report writing? Is it just as engaging as you thought it would be?
I'd say I didn't really know what to expect. I think it's really difficult in the position that everyone is in, of really understanding what it is you want to do and what it is a role actually reflects. And I think most people, to be honest, try and get it as close as possible and then have to get involved to really understand it. From my perspective, I liken it very much to a mixture of what it is as an army officer. You can often create the role to match your strengths and make the role what you want to make of it. So don't get me wrong, there are very specific roles, and if you are landed as a contract administrator, it's a very specific process that you will follow. But project management is so wide that there is so much opportunity for you to pick up and run as a sustainability project manager, where you can then be writing sustainability assessments and looking to implement them and all that really good stuff, or even going down a strategic advisory route as a PM, where actually again helping write business cases, help advise businesses on how they can look at estate development, estate rationalization, stuff that you you do as a staff officer, and again, not wishing to go down the officer route, but yeah, for me, there's so much scope within project management that you can kind of make it what you want. I don't think that really answered your question, but hopefully hopefully spoke to it a bit.
And Richard, did you have any preconceptions of a project management role?
No, I'd agree with what Justin says. It was new to me. I'd done a bit of background reading, and I guess, I don't want to repeat what Justin said because he put it really well. But there were a lot of things that I found I wasn't expecting to do. I wasn't expecting I would be involved in, and a lot of other things that I thought, okay, well, this is exactly as I've read about. But that was probably more to do with the organisations I was working in. So I was finding a bit more out about Jacobs. I was finding out a bit more about our partnership with Mott MacDonald, because we work in a sort of a kind of a JV on my current program. So there were a lot of different things that just joining a new organisation with a new client is gonna throw up. But no, there weren't any terrible surprises, and I have to say there were plenty of really good learning experiences, I'd say. So they were new things, but they were positive things.
Okay, and a final question for you, Chris, from Sam Lonsdale. He has a degree. He can go off on the RICS or CIOB route. What do you think about chartership? Is it encouraged by employers? Would you recommend it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at trying to get charters at the moment as charter project manager via the APM, going down the Route 3 option experience. Of note, the APM PMQ doesn't count as an academic qualification for it. You'd need like master's level degrees and stuff. So yeah, I'd absolutely recommend going down that. Again, it's just a way of quantifying your experience to somebody who might not necessarily understand what the hell a brigade like chief of staff does, but they understand the fact that you're chartered, and it just helps pitch you at that level.
Okay, and from Dom, will DV clearance enhance the chance of landing a job? Anybody got an answer for that?
Yeah, it will. I mean, it would probably help on some of the programs that we work on. We would value that. But equally, we'd need to look at all the others. What is the actual role? I mean, that'll get you through the door, but you've got to be able to do the job in the first place. So it's kind of there's a bit of a chicken and egg there, but certainly it would be of some advantage, I think, on some of our programs.
Very quickly,
Right.
we've got a number of nuclear projects and secure sites where DV is really useful. So,
No, that's really, really good. Well, listen, I thank you all this morning. Richard, Justin and Chris, you were fantastic. Justin and Chris, you were obviously out networking / entertaining last night, so you have done incredibly well this morning, so thank you for that. I'll pass back to Caroline to close, but listen, thank you all for your questions as well. So back to Caroline.
So just echoing those thanks. I mean, these career chats are only successful because of the speakers that come forward, and Richard came forward at the very 11th hour. He's a step in, so really appreciate that, Richard. But I'd just like to just comment, there's quite a few new people on this call that aren't registered to the programme. So just to reiterate, what Build Force does is we provide you that industry mentor and that invaluable work placement, so we can connect you to other people in Mace, and we connect by skill set, location, and kind of the level you're at. So you've got a person to talk to, relate to, and they can support you. And in fact, if Chris doesn't mind me saying, Chris came into the business via a mentor. His CV was unfortunately blocked by the automatic system. So because we connected him to a mentor, which I believe was Justin, then further connect him to the hiring director, he got the role that he'd actually been rejected for. So it does work. It doesn't always work, but it's all about making those connections, and it is really important to get you on site for work placements. So I think it was Josh, that's the last 6 months. Again, work placements are a fantastic conduit to employment. And I'm just going to do one final shout out for our Armed Forces Insight Day next week, next Wednesday. I know Angela touched on it. These are excellent forums to get in front of key industry employers and discuss your transferable skills, or just learn more about this sector, even if you're not quite looking for a role just now. And the room will be full of many opportunities that are nationwide. So that's next Wednesday at RAF Cosford. Drop me a note if you'd like to come. It's not too late. I'm always willing to squeeze in another veteran or service leaver at the last minute. So thank you all for listening. Thank you to the speakers once again, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.